Good day, listeners. I'm excited to share with you about this inspirational story of Dr. Lois Forestte Rockson, director and professor, who then became a caregiver. Dr. Rockson tells us about the unwavering support from her children, her immigrant community, and fulfilling her mother's legacy. So stay tuned. Welcome, Dr. Lois Forestte Rockson. Being talented and incomparable, I'm really happy to have you here. So before we begin, why don't you just share with me a little bit of your demographic background?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's my pleasure to be here and thanks for the invitation to share. So I'm Lois, as my friends, like you called me. I am 56 years old. I'm of Jamaican heritage, is how I identify myself, and been living here in the United States since the age of 14, wherein my family and I migrated from the Bahamas actually to good old Irvington, New Jersey. So my occupation is I am a professor at Rutgers School of Health Professions, part of the Rutgers system right here in Newark, New Jersey. I'm divorced, but I've been in partnership, as we call our relationship, with someone, Oscar, for, almost 20 years now.
Okay, thank you. So I know earlier we were talking about your experience with taking care of your mom and then also taking care of your father most recently. Why don't you just share with us about what was it like, I think, initially with your mom and stuff that you learned and then what you took from that to then take care of your dad? What was that like?
Sure. So it's really because of my mother that my family, were living here in the United States. I often describe my family as kind of healthcare refugees. We came to the U.S., specifically Newark, New Jersey, because my mom needed heart surgery, and Newark, New Jersey was the best place for her to have it. And that's the reason that we came here and settled here. My mother, thankfully, had a successful surgery and lived here, worked here in New Jersey for years. And then, as many West Indians, Jamaicans do, she and my father decided to retire in Florida. Many Jamaicans want to go back home, but it's a bit challenging. And with her healthcare needs, then they said that Florida was the best place. Because of her history of heart disease, she retired at the age of 62, relatively early, I guess, by today's standards. And over time in Florida, she began to experience congestive heart failure. And if you know anything about congestive heart failure, it's typically about 5 to 7 years from the time of diagnosis to death. So around age 65 or 66, she started to develop more and more symptoms. The challenge with her was that she was far away from all three of her daughters. I live in New Jersey. My sister lives in Arizona, and I have one sister who lives in Florida, but she was 5 hours away from my parents. The family dynamics was, I'm the oldest daughter. And that's one of the kind of tensions that I've found comes with being the oldest daughter, especially in West Indian society. You tend to bear the responsibility of taking care of the parents. And so one of the tensions with parents being far away, particularly when one is sick, is the travel time and knowing when to go and when not to go. And so as mom's health increasingly declined and more episodes related to congestive heart failure and more need for care and decision making, it was really challenging. In 1 year before she died, she was hospitalized about 25 times. And so the stress was very high in everyone because dad was alone. And everyone was far. They had some members of the community there for support. They were limited. One of the things that they intentionally did when they moved there was to become members of the church. And so their church colleagues kind of helped out in in some ways in providing care. Even though mom was sick, she wasn't very sick. When you looked at her, you would never know she was sick. So
was she independent?
Oh, she was independent.
Okay.
She still drove, but she became exhausted very easily because of the heart failure. So she was limited in what she did, but she was never bedridden or sickly, but she may get up and do things but between 10 and 2, and then by 2 o'clock she's exhausted and basically be home for the rest of the day.
So when they relocated to Florida, was it a retirement community or was it not? Was it separate?
No, it was a single family home.
A single family home. Okay. Yeah.
One of the reasons that they chose to move there is they had friends. My parents were teachers. They were educated in Jamaica. And there was a group of Jamaican trained teachers that were recruited to teach in the Bahamas. And so we had a cohort of Jamaican teachers living in the Bahamas. And then all of us kind of moved to the U.S. at the same time. And
wonderful.
We were living between New York and New Jersey, Connecticut.
Right.
And in conversations, many of them said, we can't go back to Jamaica because of the political climate. But hey, we've heard about this space in Florida, and we're all going to kind of move there. So that was the plan. So there were about 5 or 6 of their colleagues here in New York, New Jersey that bought property in this part of Florida called Palm Coast. And then through the church and those contacts or friends, then that was the reason why they chose to go there. But they were all in single family homes.
Great. So, you talk about the church, and it sort of brings me back to COVID that we just came out of. And one thing that a lot of families relied on during COVID was the church for food, for support, for resources, a place to worship, or just to socialize. And what was that experience like when they were there in terms of the type of support the church provided? Because the kids weren't there, right?
Yeah.
So what was that like?
So like I said, mom fortunately was ill, but not very sickly. And so she didn't really need a lot of kind of help in walking and things like that. The church was there to kind of come and visit, provide support. It was more of social support, socialization, more so than do you need a ride to the doctor and these types of things? Do you need help preparing meals? Mom, fortunately, did all of that up until So she was never sickly to be incapacitated that she needed help on that level. So it was the church sisters coming over to, or help. She would go and help organize. So it kind of kept her mind from her illness. So she always wanted to keep busy in that context.
Okay, wonderful. So what was then, I think that's when I knew you, when she passed away around that time. And what was that like? What did you take from sort of that lesson learned with mom? Then you had to sort of take it. But then what happened to your dad?
Yeah, so mom was easy in comparison to dad. And so we knew that mom's health was declining and that it was a concern for my dad and my 2 sisters and everyone in the family, my children included. So we didn't realize that dad was also going through some things, right? So 2 things with my father. My dad was a heavy drinker, a functional alcoholic, I'll be honest to say. And so we knew that. And we also knew historically, because when my mom got sick, she was in her early 30s. So historically, there was always this tension with my father about my mom's health. We realized that, or what we thought was dad's behavior was the combination of his fear of my mom dying, which was natural, the heavy drinking. So to be honest, we weren't paying too much attention to dad. When mom died, became instantly evident that dad had a problem.
Wow.
But we attributed that problem to grief.
Right,
My parents would have been married 50 years.
Wow.
A couple of weeks after my mom passed away.
Wow.
So it was a landmark year. They got married very young, in their early 20s, as it was at that time. So the immediate question was, now Dad is now alone in the house. He's got a group of friends, primarily male friends. So he had about a good 5 or so male friends from the church, and those folks that had moved from New York, New Jersey, and were now living there. But it was an immediate problem. He did not want to be in the house by himself. And so literally 3 weeks after Mom died, my sister, who lived in South Florida, my parents lived in North Florida, had to immediately go and get him. And it became this conversation constantly, where is Dad going to go? So right after Mom's death in 2015, it became a process of him coming from New Jersey, going to Arizona, back to Florida.
Really?
Yes.
So he was shuffled between the daughters.
He was shuffled between, well, it wasn't really the 3 daughters. It became clear that it was primarily in New Jersey.
Okay.
And the house in Florida. When he would go back to the house in Florida, he would have some of his friends would come in to stay with him. But it was primarily between my home here in New Jersey, his house in Florida, and my sister's home in Arizona. My sister in Florida would take him on occasion. She had younger children, and it was a bit more challenging for her. And her house was a lot smaller to accommodate him. So all of those things.
Wow. Yeah. It's like you think about these things, but it doesn't really resonate until you have to place someone there, right? So you're talking about spatial capacity, right? The size of the house. You're talking about the family structure, not just being a younger sister, but within her own family, she have younger kids. You're talking about, there was something else that you mentioned that I'm drawing a blank on, but it'll come back to me. But it's so, and then she lived far as well, right? Driving up north to go to North Florida. And then so he would be between your house and the house in Florida.
Yeah. So to your point, it was a lot of shuffling around. My mother, I always describe her as brilliant. Before my parents retired to Florida, as they sold their house in Irvington, New Jersey, close to me here in Maplewood, they came to live with me for a while. And when they came to live, they actually converted my basement. They paid to convert my basement and into, quote unquote, their apartment. That's what they called it. And my mother said, well, I'm doing this because if any of us ever have to come back to live with you, we have a space. And so it was kind of this, when she said that and that was out there, that narrative of it's my responsibility began to be written, because they had invested in creating this space
within your space,
within my space. And my mom, as she said, if any of us ever have to come back, this is where we're going to come. So that narrative was already started to be written. Yeah.
Now, it's interesting. Nowadays, they call it mother-daughter, right? However long they started calling it that. But that's sort of what it reminds me of, sort of converting the space into like this single-family unit into now a mother-daughter unit.
Yeah.
And how is that like with that negotiation between your mom and you as a homeowner? In some cultures, in some families, they'll get offended, or they'll feel like, oh, it's encroaching on my space. Or what was that like?
At that time when they were doing it, we weren't thinking about the end stage of their life. I was completely fine with it. My family was completely fine with it. My partner, Oscar, he did all of the work.
Wow.
And at the time, my parents were very important in the lives of my children, my 2 children. And they were, I always say, like my children's best friends. And so the energy coming from my children was, oh my goodness, we are so happy that Grandma and Grandpa will be here. And so to answer your question, it wasn't an issue, and we celebrated it at that time when we were converting the space for them to come back. And so over the years, when they would come back to New Jersey, because the bulk of our family is here in New York, New Jersey area, and Florida, and not Florida, Jamaica. And so they would come back for graduations and weddings and other activities. So that was their space. So at that time, it was celebrated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think culturally, too, that's what you do, right?
Yes.
So the expectation is that, listen, I made a lot of sacrifices for you. It is part of what we do. We take our parents come here, they make these sacrifices, and then we sort of owe it to them to kind of be there at their golden ages and to ensure that their safety, their comfort, their elder care, is taken care of, right?
Yeah.
Which is another sort of a huge responsibility, right? Not just the emotional aspect of it, but also financial space. But your mom, as you said, was really forward thinking.
Absolutely.
Where she created that space and really nurtured that relationship with you and with your family.
Yes.
And build that. But the other point you mentioned is that you being sort of the eldest or the oldest among your siblings, is that that sort of responsibility fell on you as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I think so funny, my daughter and I have had this conversation sometimes and about the role that the eldest child, typically the eldest daughter, plays. And oftentimes it's the kind of, and she pointed out to me is that she said to me that you probably didn't realize it, but you did a lot of volunteering in terms of taking care of your patient, your parents.
Yeah.
You were the one that would say, okay, I'm going to fly down to Florida now when mom was hospitalized.
Right.
So kind of taking the lead and not realizing that you were doing that and perhaps not giving others that space to do that more so than not. So it's something that has to be considered, that perhaps I always felt that it was my role and then was very forthright in fulfilling this quote unquote role unconsciously.
It's funny you mentioned that and I wonder at what point had you not, say you did not respond or go visit, that perhaps another sibling would have stepped up?
I think for me, it was perhaps saying, I don't think they're going to do it. There were times that, I couldn't, and then it didn't happen. So kind of learning from their response to the situation and saying, well, I see now that it looks like as I thought that I had to take the lead. So there's the evidence that I do.
Right. Earlier, you did talk about how it depends on the situation of the other siblings, right? Whether they are putting aside their spatial capacity, whether they have the room, putting aside the financial, the young kids, et cetera, all these dynamics that interplay into the provision of care. I wonder what it may have felt for them. Because as I'm thinking about it, I'm not there yet, but I wonder, well, actually, I take that back. I am there. And it is overwhelming. And I wonder what it's like for the kids and or my siblings. I wonder how they feel about that,
Yeah, I mean, I did get some insight from them, obviously. They all were going through certain things. So, for example, one sibling had her father-in-law was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so they were dealing with that challenge before I began to deal with that challenge as well. So it was recognized that everyone in their own families were dealing with certain dynamics, as you said earlier, the financial aspects of it. They're taking care of younger children or now in-laws who are a little bit ahead in terms of their kind of transitioning and their decline. So all of that had to come. So yes, that was definitely part of the conversation that, sorry, I just can't do it because XYZ is happening. So it became that I was, I guess, fortunate to be in a space where I have a lot of social support. Even though I'm divorced, my children's father was always there, that if I needed to travel, they were there. He was there, and
right.
lots of other family members and friends around as well that were able to offer the support. So there's that saying, it takes a village. So I had the village, so that enabled me to do a lot more things than perhaps my sisters that lived in spaces where they don't have the village.
Yeah, that sounds very empowering, right? To have that village, as you say. And what I've experienced myself was that, like you said, when you have, siblings, in my case, it's grandma, as I would like to call her. And, when her kids were far away, but we were the closest one, grandma by marriage,
I see.
right? And we had to, I think that's one thing that really helps tremendously. The frequent visits, the frequent follow-up. Yes, it can happen, but you have to have, like you said, that community on hand, on the ground, right? That can go and do the visits, that can report back, that can say, okay, this is what's going on for her. This is how I feel. This is what I don't feel. This is what I've noticed. And it's not just grandma condition. What about the house? What about being aware that there's a leak, that you got to call someone? What about the snowstorm where you need someone to shovel the snow? What about the upkeep of the environment around you? So fast forward, now you have dad. So what was that like, that experience? Now he's with you.
So dad eventually was spending more and more time with me. He was spending more and more time out of the house in Florida. We wanted to get him back into the house in Florida, but then we began to realize, like I said, we began to notice things. Initially, thought it was the grief of mom's death because he took it hard. But then there were things that became evident that it's beyond grief. He started to not remember things, but that was fine. We again chalked it up to the grief. But mom passed away in 2015. So around maybe more 2017, it became evident that things were wrong. He stopped showering. We noticed changes in hygiene. And I want to say maybe in spring of 2017, or 2018, he was with my sister in Arizona, and I got a call from her that there was an episode with dad. He woke up in the middle of the night screaming that there were people sitting on his bed and that they were trying to attack him, and he was trying to escape through closet. When he was in Arizona, he was in my nephew's room, and my nephew slept on the sofa, for example, something like that. And so anyway, he was trying to go out through the closet, and he didn't recognize my sister. So it was obvious something was wrong. And next morning he woke up like nothing happened. So my sister took him to a neurologist out there, and he kind of said, well, yeah, it sounds like a little bit of dementia, but didn't make most of it because all of my dad's physicians were in Florida.
That was my next question. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So his primary care physician was in Florida. So the gentleman in Arizona didn't know anything about,
or have his history.
So dad was going from Arizona and going back to Florida. But he only spent a little bit of time in Florida with a cousin, and my cousin also noticed something. But anyway, in the summer of 2018, he came to spend the summer with me, and decline became more and more evident.